Okay, I'm recording. Sorry, it's sneaky. It never tells anybody. Um, it does it tell you? Does Screenomatic say anything? Okay.
No, no,
Okay.
my rights are violated. I don't know that I'm being recorded.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. You'll live. Um, okay, so I'm going to talk about the beginnings of ABA, and it's really rooted in Skinner's philosophy of what is Skinner's philosophy of radical behaviorism, right? So Skinner was looking at um, behavior, and his predecessors were working on operant behavior, and operant behavior is voluntary behaviors. Really, it's behaviors that are elicited with stimuli. So an example would be like a bright light and then you blink. So it's really a reflex. When we think about operant behaviors, we think reflex, right? But then Skinner recognized that there were behaviors that were not reflexes, but they were more voluntary, and they were more dependent on the consequence. So whether or not the behavior were going to occur again was largely dependent on the consequence. Whether it was adversive, then the behavior was less likely to happen, or whether it was favorable for the individual or the rat, um, then it would be more likely to occur. So he called this type of behavior respondent behavior. And then, so respondent behavior really took off when he wrote Behavior of Organisms. And he summarized what the difference between respondent and operant behavior was. And that is really what we recognize as the beginning of radical behaviorism. And that's the root of ABA, is radical behaviorism. That is considered the philosophy of ABA. And then from there, the four domains of ABA is it starts with radical behaviorism, and then we move on to the second domain, the experimental analysis of behavior, and that is really the uh, all the experiments that really established ABA. So that's Skinner's box and all the lab research that went into reinforcement and extinction. And we consider that the second domain of ABA. That's ABA, basic research. And then the third domain is ABA. It's the individualized treatment plans, it's dissertation research, it's behavior change plans. That's the third domain. And then the fourth domain is the practices guided by ABA. So that's like we use ABA to create weight loss programming, or we can even look at, I guess people are using it to look at sports stats. I don't know. But, it can go into all sorts of different realms. Someone was talking to me about global behavior change for environmental change. So I thought, conservatism or whatever it is. Conservatism? Whatever. So those are the four domains, but really, I guess I have to backtrack. I think I jumped ahead of myself. So if we go back to radical behaviorism, the philosophy of ABA, uh, that's Skinner chose to incorporate. So he was working on these thoughts about the same time someone else was, Watson, right? And so Watson chose to completely ignore private thoughts. He believed that if you couldn't observe it, then it wasn't, what did he say? He chose not to acknowledge the existence of mental events. If he couldn't observe it, then he wasn't going to consider it a behavior, and it didn't affect behavior. But um, Skinner recognized that private events do have impact on your behavior, and it would be wrong to completely ignore them. While we need to focus on the observable, we also need to acknowledge like things like whether or not the kid um, had a bad day, or something happened with mom in the morning is going to affect his behavior later. So he incorporated private events into radical behaviorism, and so ABA does as well. Um, although he kind of strayed away from mentalism, um, because mentalism is really focuses on the inner dimension, and that all behavior comes from your inner thoughts. And it would be hard to observe. I get confused with mentalism. Do you know much about mentalism? Is it?
I've heard the term before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would have a hard time articulating it fully, but um, like what social workers do.
Right. It's more of a
Like,
therapy, right? Right.
yeah,
Okay. I need to ask Chelsea more about that because it seems like Skinner kind of chose to straddle both worlds between Watson and then whatever mental whoever came up with mentalism. But mentalism falls under this inner dimension, and then all behavior has this fictional cause, and then there's this other term that the Cooper book wanted you to talk about, or explanatory fiction. And that's really ABA stays away from that, right? So it's that the kid chose to do that because he knew what was going to happen. And there's this explanatory fiction says that this knowledge or a cognitive process that told them or could explain the behavior, and it makes behavior um, really unobservable when we go down that rabbit hole. And so, um, yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to say is that radical behaviorism chose to straddle both worlds, and we focus on the observable, but we acknowledge that there's mental processes. And I'll leave it at that because I've already confused myself. Um,
well, I think just to add on that, and I think what you're saying is what they call setting events, right?
right, yeah,
That
yeah.
that there's these things that play a role in the way someone's going to behave, which kind of goes into like motivational operations, right? Like the MOs, like if the kid didn't have breakfast, he's going to be a lot more susceptible to the reinforcement of food
Mm-hmm.
than someone who just ate.
Yeah,
So like looking at both of those things that yeah you can observe and measure like in the moment with behaviorism, but radical behaviorism looks at like, well yeah I can see that you're sitting right there and that you're picking up the fork, but like you're also taking into account like what happened before
mm-hmm.
and what are we not seeing.
Right. And then ABA, the way we define behavior is more functional than mentalism, whereas a mentalist would say, oh, the child threw the book because he knew that it would upset the teacher, and it takes into account so much of this cognitive process that we couldn't possibly know what he knew or what he didn't know, right? Whereas ABA says, well, previous experience says that when he throws the book, he can get thrown out of the classroom, and it is an escape for him, right? That's the function, escape, right? So it's I think that's what I'm trying to say is it straddles the two worlds. Um, a lot of this stuff is so confusing. Um, okay, so then from there, it was really who are the people that did it? Sorry, I'm going back and forth my book. Okay, so from behavior. Oh, I've only got a few more minutes, so let me just. Um, okay, so really, they took the first few people um, were Fuller. He wrote the first study on operant behavior, and he included an individual with an intellectual disability. And then Alon and Michael in 1959 really did the first study that used official ABA. But ABA was not created until two events occurred. The first publication of the Applied Behavior Analysis journal, and the publication of some current dimensions of applied behavior analysis by Baer, Wolf, and Risley. So it was their their study of the seven dimensions: applied, behavioral, analytic, technological, conceptually semantic, effective, and capable of appropriately generalizing outcomes. And I'll turn it
Yeah,
over to my colleague.
Yeah, that's where I jump in. That's perfect. What a segue. Fantastic. Yeah. All right. Do you want to pause there and then make me host?
Sure.